Hi everyone, it's Blake again with Northwinds Wilderness School. Thanks for joining us again on what I would call balmy day in Wisconsin. We're out at Spirit Lake doing some ice fishing, and I'm here with Kersey Lawrence and Gutteridge, Original Wisdom Nature Guide Training. I'm going to guess at least some of you have heard of these folks before. Can you tell us about Nature Guide Training? What do you do?
Sure. Well, we're a little company in South Africa that basically focuses on the preparation of field guides for the nature industries in South Africa, as well as lots of international study abroad programs, and a lot of tracking. We focus very heavily on training trackers from around the world and preparing them for the cyber tracker evaluation processes.
Nice. What about you? What does Original Wisdom do?
Much of the same, except we don't do the field guide training. So we do international tracker programs, both here in the U.S. and in Southern Africa. We also do study abroad programs for high schools, colleges, universities, wilderness schools. We pretty much custom make programs to the interest of the group that's coming over or wherever we're going. Like next week, we're actually going to Yellowstone to go and do a winter ecology program and perhaps trail some wolves.
So
we do vary it up a bit.
Nice.
And then, nature connection, just getting people out into the field and getting them comfortable with being cold or being warm or
being hot.
Whatever it is. Yeah, this is quite different.
Yeah.
Yeah,
nature connection is a huge focus of Northwinds. That's, we underlie a lot of the deeper meaning into our classes. So you come in, you're studying fire making, but what you're actually learning is nature connection, mindfulness, awareness. I'm curious if you can tell us what you think people get out of learning tracking. Like, what is the value for the average person?
Well, more than just knowing what's in your environment, because it is one of the best tools that I've found just to increase awareness, both awareness, alertness, about what is around you potentially, but awareness of different species and how those species interact with each other and with the landscape. Mm-hmm. More than that, which is fundamentally what people think when they're tracking. Tracking is a process of figuring things out. Yeah. And it gets you outside, so it gets you closer to and more a part of the nature that we all are actually a part of. We just removed ourselves from it in a lot of instances. And it also it creates, that fundamental process, that learning process of how to figure things out.
Right.
Whether it's how to look something up in a field guide, or what line of questioning you should use when you see a track that you don't know what it is. And does it have 5 toes? Does it have 4 toes? Does it only have 2 toes? How is it moving? Where is it going? It's the process of figuring things out that actually plays into a lot of other aspects of life. Like how do you figure things out in life? So I think that's one of the biggest takeaways of tracking.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like to talk to people about learning your place in the food chain, learning about what the human role in nature is, and to remind people that we are animals and we are part of nature. We are meant to be there.
Absolutely.
A big part of that is very evident where we live, because there you're no longer at the top of the food chain.
Right.
Yeah.
You fit in quite nicely, and you're somewhere near the top, and you get a sense of that when you're out on the trail and you're tracking 7 or 8 lions. You know that you've got to be very, very wary.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you could end up getting really close to nature.
Yeah.
A lot closer than you anticipate.
Right.
And to me, tracking pretty much connects everything that we do out there. Mm-hmm. When we go guide people in the field, without tracking, we wouldn't understand. We would understand a fraction of what we can at least perceive at the moment.
Yeah.
So for me, tracking's it's the connector that brings everything together. It links everything in our environment. and there's a way to go back to tracking to in every single aspect. Yeah,
Right.
It's amazing. Tracking is a very, very important part of what we teach and what we do.
Yeah, and it's fun.
It's fun. Yeah.
So I know that I have learned so much from the time that I've gotten to spend with you two, for which I'm eternally grateful. Hey everyone. Sorry about the change. We had some technical difficulties. The cold out on the lake made my camera stop working. So we're going to finish this up in the house where it's warm. So where we left off, I was asking you if you could, without giving away your trade secrets, share with our viewers how people should or would best go about learning tracking.
So we give away the trade secrets all the time. That's what we do. Because there's no point to learning something if you can't give it away and pass it on and carry it on.
So they're not secrets.
So they're not secrets.
Okay.
And I think pretty much anyone who teaches tracking would agree with that.
That's fair.
Yeah, and basically go out there and practice. To get good at tracking, all it takes is time. It's not some God-given or tribal-related ability. Every culture on Earth came from a tracking culture originally at its roots, and we all have that capacity. And tracking can be very easy, and it can be very difficult, and it can go from very easy to very difficult very quickly, but then it can go back to very easy in just the same amount of time. So all you really need to do is get out there and do it. And it does help to have a mentor, and that mentor can be either a book or a series of books, field guides. There's a number of really good field guides out there. There's the internet, which is a wonderful resource. You know, if you find a feather, you can look it up on the Feather Atlas, as well as in Casey's book. There's a lot of resources there. But to really accelerate your learning, it helps to have a person who is a mentor, somebody who you can practice with. It doesn't necessarily have to be an expert. It can be somebody who's at the same level as you are, as long as you keep each other motivated to keep going out there and you keep practicing.
Right.
But then occasionally, go to a class or bring in an instructor, and that will help you to make leaps forward in your tracking ability.
Yeah, I think that starting with a class, starting with a training program of some kind, with mentors or with people of a similar level, I mean, that's a great place to start, because when you're on your own, it's very easy to be right.
I've noticed that.
Yes, and you can you can convince yourself of anything. So if you're out there with people that have a little more knowledge than you, or maybe register for a class, I mean, it's such a great way to start the process. Not to say that every time you practice you have to have a mentor with you, but that's a really great way to start out, by joining a class, doing some reading. I think that's one of the best ways to get into tracking. And then, of course, like Kersey says, just practice, get out there, do it.
I think we've talked about this in the past. For the first several years that I was trying to learn tracking, I was always by myself, and I just felt like I was spinning my wheels. I would read the books, I would go out in the field, I would find tracks, and I would say, that's obviously a deer, that's obviously a raccoon, that's obviously a wolf, that's obviously a chupacabra, whatever it came out to be.
We see a lot of those.
Yeah, they're common in this area.
Yeah.
And when I discovered the Minnesota Tracking Club, it was like epiphany after epiphany after epiphany of all you need is someone who knows the answer to help you figure it out.
Yeah.
And
then you can figure it out for yourself from there on in, because you understand the techniques of how to do that and what to look for. And where before it was obviously a raccoon and turned out to be a porcupine.
Right.
You start to see those mistakes that you've been making, and it's definitely a good way to do it, to interact with other
When
trackers.
somebody is more knowledgeable than you in how to tell, that this curve of this toe or this shape of this heel pad means that it's this species and not that species,
Right.
and they can point it out to you, when maybe you were looking at the whole thing and not recognizing the individual parts. And
Right.
it's not that you're not capable of it, it's just that you haven't thought to really look at that maybe.
Right.
And then somebody else points it out to you and you're like, oh yeah, I do see that. And then you start going out on your own or with your friends, and you see that more and more, and it confirms what they teach you. So it's different teachers, different ways of explaining things that can help push you, you know, and help you to
Another
find the
really
answers.
good way of learning tracking is to attend an assessment, because that's one of the steepest
Cyber
learning curves. Yeah, a cyber tracker assessment is one of the steepest learning curves that you can imagine.
And it's fun.
Yeah, and the
They are fun.
really interesting thing that I experienced when I assess at home in Africa, in South Africa, is that something may appear complex, but when you've explained it to the student who didn't get it right, they look and they go, I should have just seen that, because it's right there in front of me, and it's such an obvious thing. Most of the time, it's actually so clean cut, and it makes so much sense
Right.
once it's explained to you. And once it's explained once, it should, and often does, stay with you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also a great way of learning tracking, to attend an assessment process.
Yeah.
Even if you're very new to tracking, it's a wonderful learning curve.
I've learned more in the 3 assessments that I've done than in all of my other tracking experience combined, I believe. And I think it's like the other day when you guys were explaining to me how to tell the difference between a leopard and a lion, it doesn't immediately feel like that information is applicable to Wisconsin.
It's not.
But while we were having that conversation, I was thinking about when I started to learn how to differentiate between a fox and a coyote. Mm-hmm. Because in many ways, I think those 2 tracks can look very similar. But when you start talking about like the negative space and the chevron shape of the palm pad,
A little bar at the back, and all those tiny details.
yeah,
Yeah.
the small details go from obscure to very obvious. You know, when we were with Brian at Wild River, we walked out into this sand road, and he said, "Oh, look, it's a fox track," and all I saw was a dimple in the sand, and it sent me on this mission to try to figure out how he knew that was a fox track.
Brian just knows.
He's probably looked at 10,000 fox tracks in different kinds of substrates.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And all it is, after you learn how to figure things out, after you learn the process, all it is a matter of repetition.
Yeah.
Because a fox track in thin sand looks very different than in deep sand or in mud or in snow or whatever.
Right.
And so you have to get all of those different search images in your head, just like
That's
when
it.
you're trailing a deer. And everybody
Yeah.
thinks, oh, I know what a deer track looks like. But, you know, you ask an obscure deer track on a track and sign evaluation, and sometimes half the group will get it wrong because they're used to only looking at the perfect tracks.
Right. Sometimes it's just a hole in a pile of leaves.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about those sight pictures. It's literally having a folder in your mind that you can open up and look through hundreds of images that you have, each a different type of search image, so you can basically project what you have seen previously
Mm-hmm.
and recognize what you're seeing on the ground. So that's probably what Brian was doing there. He's followed so many good trails that become obscure trails, that become good trails again,
Yeah.
that he's learned what that obscure track looks like. And there are certain small features which are sometimes difficult to verbalize.
Right.
But when you've seen them enough times, it's kind of like, I recognize the way that track has twisted slightly, or the way that only the 2 central toes drag, or whatever it may be.
Right.
But the track can be totally obscure, but still makes sense to you.
Yep. All right. Well, I know you guys need to get going, which means that I also need to get going. So,
Thanks for everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys
Yeah.
so much for being here. Thank you for taking the time to do this interview. If you learned anything from this or you found value in it, please find a friend to share it with. If you have any experience with tracking or have any input you want to offer, please leave us a comment. As always, thank you very much. I appreciate every second of your time. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.